Introduction and for the opportunity to speak here. Can I have my presentation? I was asked to do this lecture, which I actually gave in Alaminos. I hope it has improved a bit. In the previous RSMs, a lot of the attention was paid to trying to meet this, say, UNESCO standard of the number of researchers, scientists, and engineers in a country. We all know that we are far from this number. The idea of holding this plenary session was proposed by former President Diliman. He said, we really need a sophisticated approach and a variety of interventions to address this problem of talent development and retention. So many of the speakers have tried to give their ideas on how to improve our production, our development of talent, and how to retain them. The number, of course, that we're looking at is 380 researchers per million. In the UNESCO 2015 science report, the Philippines only provided 2007 data and we only had 78 per million. That is so far from 380. Of course, DOST-STII says the number has doubled, but 150, 160 is still far from 380. And just look at our neighbors, look at Singapore, and you don't wonder why they are so advanced. A lot of students don't really enter the STEM disciplines in college. Mathematics has a very small enrollment. You can see that in the first figure. And also the natural sciences. Of course, we have a lot of students going to engineering, IT, but then you wonder about the quality also of many of our schools and colleges offering these programs. But in my talk, I want to step back a bit and talk about more fundamental issues about education. And I hope that I can tie this up with the idea of talent development and retention at the end. Our educational landscape is changing. We know that globalization is driving many changes from basic to higher education. We know that the fourth industrial revolution is now with us, and this refers to the revolution due to data-driven technology, including artificial intelligence. There are many global changes that affect higher education, and even the way we look at how we do things. When we used to talk before of national development and economic nationalism, now we're looking at world market participation. Before, we used to prepare, we say we prepared people in college by giving them the skills and the tools to have good jobs, have good careers. But now, we know it's more important to prepare students for lifelong learning and so-called 21st century skills. And because of these different changes, worldwide changes, many ambitious projects have been undertaken by government, by higher educational institutions, by the educational system in general. Let's take a look at some of them. Here in the Philippines, the biggest reform movement has been the K-12, which has just started. Outside, we see universities forming consortia, merging, creating strategic partnerships just to improve their positions in world rankings. There are many schools which now have very progressive admission systems. In the US, there are top schools that don't anymore require standardized exams like SATs or GREs. We now have a variety of delivery methods, from massive open online courses, blended learning, flipped classrooms, the use of digital platforms. Internationalization is now regarded as very important, and student mobility from one institution to another, from one country to another, are all part of this reform movements. There is also, relative to the underlying theme of this conference, which is sustainable development, so-called education for sustainable development. What do I mean by education for sustainable development? Well, but first, I want to stress that the session on this session really the underlying SDG goal is SDG 4, which is quality education. But what does SDG 4 really say? It says ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. I highlight the for all because that is the point of this talk, which I will talk more about later. I think that really the long-term and strategic targets of SDG 4 will give us the necessary environment to meet our objective of obtaining a critical mass of scientists. But first, let me distinguish. I mentioned ESD, or Education for Sustainable Development. This refers to the kind of education that really encourages changes in knowledge, attitudes, skills, and values of our students and our people to enable a more sustainable and just society. It is the kind of education that prepares our students for the labor market towards a broader goal of building a more sustainable society. So ESD, this is really a worthy cause in itself, but this is not really what I want to talk about. I want to talk about maybe a more nuanced idea, which is that of sustainable education. Let me take now the view of examining our educational system from a sustainable perspective. In short, are our country's educational institutions and the educational system or systems in which they are embedded themselves sustainable? The way that we look at our marines, our oceans, our environment, we can look at education itself, the educational system, and try to examine whether it is sustainable. Okay? But if we agree that the major objective of development is the satisfaction of human needs, then the easy answer to this question is no. We are very far from meeting this objective. According to experts like Sterling, he said this is a paradox because our schools are tasked to prepare our students to learn about the value of sustainability, but the schools themselves are not sustainable. What do I mean by that? Well, we go back to the requirements of sustainability. When this term was first proposed, really sustainability meant the meeting of several criteria. For instance, one working definition is that sustainable development refers to meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. It also means meeting the basic needs of all peoples and extending the opportunity to satisfy their aspirations for a better life. Thirdly, it means not endangering the natural systems that support life on Earth. By natural systems, they were really thinking about the environment at that time. We can, of course, recast these criteria in terms of when we examine our educational system, in terms of sustainability. So our educational institutions and systems they are embedded in, do they satisfy the needs of all students and educators? Do they satisfy the needs of the present students, making sure that future generations are also well prepared and that they will be prepared for the future? And are the natural resources that are present in educational institutions and systems used in a sustainable way rather than being wasted or depleted? Let's look at the first question. Do our schools satisfy the needs of all students? We can ask many questions. Are we providing access and for all students at all levels? Are our schools safe and secure? Do we provide a green and healthy environment? Do our students and their teachers have enough facilities and resources? When we talk about the curriculum, is the curriculum meeting the outcomes, the intended outcomes? And in the end, are our students really learning in schools? The second question about making sure that the needs of the present students are satisfied by also preparing them for the future. Well, think about our schools now, and we can ask these questions. Is our curriculum really focused on learning and preparing them to become lifelong learners? Is there a good fit between the kind of education they are receiving and the type of jobs, for instance, that they will be doing when they graduate? Even for our teachers, is the kind of training that they receive before they get their education and after really effective and sustainable? We can ask many questions. And there are many indicators that point to really the fact that we have not met this criterion. How about our natural resources? Are they being used in a sustainable way? What do I mean by natural resources in the context of education? Well, of course, these refer to the people, which includes students and teachers and administrators. But natural resources also refer to things like students' talents, prior and local knowledge, their teachers' expertise and skills, students' interest. The education that we provide them might destroy these things or not make use of them effectively. And that is what we mean by natural resources being depleted or being wasted. Think about all the waste that we are creating in our educational systems. There are so many out-of-school children and youth. In 2017, for instance, the number of out-of-school youth and children defined to be between the ages of between 6 and 24 who are either unenrolled or have dropped out was 3.6 million. What is 3.6 million? If you're thinking about, if we say that the population of the Philippines is 100 million, then the magic number of UNESCO for 380 per million would translate to this 3.8 million. All of those out-of-school children, if they become scientists or engineers, they would fill this gap that we are facing now. And among these out-of-school children and youth, 83% of them are in the high school and college ages between 16 and 24. And we also know that most of these individuals, most of these youth, are those who belong to poor families. So the weaknesses that we can see at the basic or level are also reflected in higher education. For instance, many of our HEIs are not efficient. There is a proliferation of public institutions in the Philippines and HEIs in general. There are poor student flows. We all know that when 100 students enter elementary, maybe less than one or maybe just one will go on and continue to college. There are so many academic programs offered being duplicated and offered by all these institutions. And the quality is something that we can measure. There are very poor faculty profiles in many places. Our licensure performance results are very low. We know that many schools lack instructional facilities, libraries, laboratories. We have nice curriculum, but the implemented ones are really poor. And again, we have problems in equity and access. For government institutions or SUCs, we now have no tuition. But I'm not sure if that is the best policy one can create. No tuition. In the case of UP, we will probably just subsidize the richer students, because when you look at the profile of students, there is only a very small percentage of very poor students, and more resources that we pour to that small percentage instead of to the bigger middle students coming from the middle class or from the rich. So how do we move forward? It is clear that many institutions are now working hard, pouring more funding and investing more in education, because this is really what we need to meet our national development goals and improve our opportunities for innovation and competitiveness. Where do we pour this money? We pour this on a lot of laboratories, building science schools, sending faculty abroad even to the best schools, attracting our faculty of Filipinos abroad to come back. And we have seen very positive results from all these initiatives. But the point I want to make is that these are available only to a very small pool of individuals. Many years ago, people like academician Alan Bernardo have been saying that our interventions to achieve excellence really revolve more on the inputs, the learner, and what he terms an elitist selective system that views success in education as to mean satisfying increasingly higher and higher levels of requirements. How does that look like? Well, those who eventually graduate at the top from good schools will start somewhere. When they start in elementary schools, those who are better students pass entrance exams to better elementary schools, and then pass another set of entrance exams and use their good grades to get into even better high schools, and so on. So we start weeding out people or filtering out people because of this system. So far from being inclusive, we have been segregating those using either their talent or their perceived talent in math and science from the rest of the studentry as filters. This system, of course, will add to the disenchantment of the majority of the rest or excluded. Let me quote academician Bernardo said, within this framework of selectivity, it seems that excellence in science and math education is possible only for a few. So that when researchers or academics or policymakers talk about science and math reform, usually the discourse centers on two things. Just two things. Well, identify those who are talented, give them books, give them all the opportunities, the best teachers. But never mind about the rest who are not in this small pool. We seem to be counting on really a very small base to bring us where we want. It is at the expense of others. Marx said that education really benefits only the ruling class. The ruling class is really mostly the wealthy and those in power. Our education system is far from inclusive. What are the rest? The rest are the poor, the marginalized and the disadvantaged, like persons with disabilities, indigenous peoples. We all know there are many scientific studies now that show the close link between poverty and education. And there is a clear causal relationship that children living in poor households or in poverty really end up having low educational attainment or low educational achievements. So from the start, children in poverty are really left behind. Many studies show, for instance, that in households where even the head of family, educational attainment of the head of family, the lower the education attainment, the higher chances that the family will be poor families. And it is not just because the poor are subjected to stress and the lack of resources that make them lag behind their better classmates or their richer classmates. Now we also know a biological link between poverty and education. Researchers have determined that children who grew up in poor and destitute conditions really have less developed working memory. Working memory is the link between poverty and education. It refers to the type of memory that allows us to hold information and use facts for short-term use and manipulation. A good working memory allows you to maybe develop more your reading and language skills, problem-solving skills. These are exactly the skills that are being tested when students at the very low ages do entrance exams, final exams, competitions. So, poor people are really disadvantaged, and not just because of the social or economic conditions, but really even physiological conditions determined by this weakening of working memory. So, my point is we really want to aim for inclusive education. And inclusive education, as far as science and math is concerned, also focuses on building a scientific culture or culture of science for everyone. There are many people who believe that science and math education reforms can truly help achieve our national development goals if it succeeds in making the scientific way of thinking part of our culture. We really want science and math for all. Good science and math available for all. So maybe we can move away from maybe very selective or systems which are often rationalized because we are a poor country and we lack resources. Let us use math as not as filters, but as pumps. Math ability, which includes logical training, math and science ability, logical training, the scientific way of thinking. We can use this to develop the individual wholly, okay? And prepare and get a bigger pool of potential talent for development even at the higher levels. So I think this is maybe part of, maybe this is the sophisticated or astute approach or one of those approaches that Academician Padulina was looking for. And really SDG 4 is what this is all about. Okay? Sustainable education is about providing the best type of education, science and math included for all. Let us provide science and math, good math education for all, and create that fertile environment which is needed for our critical mass of scientists. If you only look at maybe colleges or graduate school, the pool already has been depleted, and we will be forever playing a game of catch up. When we do this, I think our objective of developing talent will be easier. So what are some recommendations I can make? We have to really of course, needless to say, SDG 1, which addresses poverty, is very important. But we can do other things. We can look at the way we train talent or development, make it more inclusive, less selective or elitist. We must seriously address our out-of-school youth rates, look at the children who are not studying. And then we can also assess our educational institutions and our systems from this sustainable perspective. As a start, we can look at K-12, what types of students it has produced and how effective it has been, what changes we can incorporate. National scientist Ben Neves, who's a mathematician, said, "The foundation of science is a literate culture. To develop science in the Philippines, therefore, one has to improve all levels of the educational system." According to Father Ben, We should not copy practices blindly, which we often do when we think about educational reform. But we should instead reflect on goals and values, our Filipino goals and values, and ask what practices in our culture might achieve them. You might not agree, but sabi ni Mao, let 100 flowers bloom and 100 schools of thought contend. So maybe there are also other approaches. And then, because this is June 19, I want to quote Jose Rizal. Just like Einstein, a favorite source of quotation. Sabi ni Rizal, genius has no country. It blossoms everywhere. It is like light, the air. It is the heritage of us all. No good water comes from a muddy spring. No sweet fruit comes from a bitter sea. I like Rizal. I have a collection of Rizal statues. In El Filibusterismo, Rizal said, ano sa makatwid ang isang universidad? Isang institusyon para hindi matuto? Nagtitipon-tipon ba ang ilang tao sa ngalan ng kaalaman at pagtuturo para hadlangan matuto ng iba? I think Rizal, 150 years ago, was talking about inclusive education for all. Thank you very much.